A very good morning this Sunday morning. It is my pleasure and delight to welcome you to the first session of Caregiving and Print and in Print and Pictures for this year. As you're aware, this is a series of conversations that we have to be able to have a look at caregivers and caregiving in how it is represented to us through print and pictures. Why is this important? Storytelling over the years and through narratives, there are ideas that are formed, social norms that are embedded and entrenched. Specifically, if you look at the Indian or the subcontinent culture, there is a certain view to caregivers and caregiving, which has been deeply entrenched by the stories that are repeatedly told, by the stories that are written, whether in books or in films. It has been our endeavor to be able to look at caregivers and caregiving who tend to be invisible, unrecognized, underappreciated, and underserved. What does it mean to look at the world through their eyes? And in this series, we bring you authors and people who have relentlessly worked, either lived this through their life experience, written about it, or worked in that area. And I cannot tell you how delighted I am with the guest today, who has done all of this and more, and inspired certainly me and many others about the whole world of the caregiver. And we will be having a conversation about empowering caregivers by having an insight into what is the mindset of a caregiver. Many of you have given questions as you registered, and those of you who are here today will request you to use the chat box to leave your questions as we go along, and we will try and integrate them as we have this conversation. In every session that I do, mostly I bring up this picture and say, who is the caregiver here? I get all kinds of answers. As is obvious, most people think the lady sitting next to the gentleman, the elderly lady, is the primary caregiver. That is true. That is our stereotype, and that is the norm. Maybe she is, but our endeavor is for all of us to be able to see how each one in this picture is actually a caregiver. And my favorite one is that little boy on the bottom right. In how many ways is the child a caregiver? Keenly looking on at the scene, learning from what is going on, and maybe making impressions of what kind of a person he will grow up to be. Will he be a caregiver, given the experiences that he has? So social norms, narratives, stories have a way of embedding what is okay, what is not okay, what is expected, what is the gold standard, and what might caregiving look like. Unlike most other skills, caregiving is imbibed by virtue of life experience. Neither academics nor professional experiences focus or highlight or teach us how to care. Yet, we are all caregivers. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Caregiver Saathi. Caregiver Saathi is our initiative and endeavor in which we hope to build an ecosystem for family caregivers, an ecosystem that enables and empowers well-being and healing for the primary caregiver. Family caregivers of those navigating terminal illness, chronic, or any other life-limiting conditions have unique challenges, and we would like to support them through their caregiving journeys and hopefully even beyond. How do we do this? We do this through awareness programs, through our helpline, through healing circles, the ongoing research, and social media communication. In our awareness programs, we have webinars like Compassionate Caring, This Conversation in Print and Pictures, Humanizing Our Healers, and Conversations with Caregivers, where they share their stories, and we call them Conversations with Gentle Warriors. A helpline for those who may need to figure out what this means and where can they get the necessary information. Healing circles for support groups or for dealing with situations that are normally not okay, whether it is love or loss. Research, both in print, whether it is others' research or our own research, and social media communication to create a sense of awareness and advocacy through various channels. The resources that we have built so far include our website. I would encourage you to have a look at our new website. And we have just initiated a new way of presenting our information. Please have a look and give us feedback. Education programs through online and offline programs. These days, more online than offline, as you can imagine, is the state of the world. Community sensitization through podcasts, daily communication, and conversations. Caregiver coaching and family counseling. We're introducing the services of coaching specifically for caregivers. This is about emotional mastery and resilience that caregivers so need during their journey. And finally, a volunteer base that is spread across the world to support on emotional first aid, as well as providing reliable information resources. There are many ways in which you can get involved, either through conversations, through spreading the word, through volunteering with us, partnering with us, and joining our organization. Find what works for you and sign up on the website. Of course, running support groups is not just for a caregiver, it is for well-wishers of caregivers, as well as for people who may have been caregivers in the past. Your wisdom, experience, and perspective is absolutely essential for people who are in the thick of things and may not be able to see things from different points of view. Funding is critical for us to be able to sustain ourselves. You could help us raise funds. You could collaborate with us, participate in our research, or certify yourself to be a Saathi. Saathi is someone who is a companion to a caregiver. There's a framework of well-being and resilience that we refer to. It has 7 elements. At the very core for the individual is the physiological, psychological, and spiritual well-being. In terms of our interface with the world, it is the social, financial, legal, and an alignment of our life and work purpose. These elements contained within our creative expression are the 7 elements that lend an overall sense of well-being to an individual. Very often I say, just like white light is split into its 7 colors, our well-being is split into its 7 elements for us to be able to understand it better and be able to ensure that we can build long-term sustainable well-being. Stress is caused by an imbalance in these elements, and unaddressed chronic stress can lead to mental health issues. It is therefore important to have a certain quality of emotional mastery and build resilience through practices that address all elements of the mind, body, and soul in order to be able to go through the roller coaster ride that caregiving might be. And with that, for today's session, we will have an interaction, question answer session. This is first an interaction with the guest, Dr. Ebony Green, and followed by question answers with you. We would also request you to fill the feedback form and give us suggestions so that we can design better programs in the future. Regular announcements, since all of us are now quite experts at attending webinars, I will not go through everything, just be mindful of being mute. Do show up if you feel like, and ask your question by raising hand. Should you have any questions, use the chat box and we will be happy to address them. An introduction to the speaker. Dr. Ebony Ivory Green is a registered nurse and a family caregiver. There are very, very few introductions that I have seen that begin with that kind of an introduction. And I am delighted to see this. She holds a PhD. So normally you would find that somebody would highlight their PhD before they're being a caregiver. Look at this. In human services with a specialization in healthcare admin. She has extensive experience in focusing on caregivers' health and wellness with an emphasis on caregiver stress, burnout, and related family conflicts. Dr. Green has contributed to publications and given presentations that focus on training, assessing, and supporting caregivers. She's a published author and has written 3 books focusing on family caregiving, At the Heart of the Matter, Caregiving in the New Millennium, and Reflections from the Soul. Since 1998, I should have gotten to know you, Ebony, long ago. She has been leading Caregiver Support Services, which help in training, supporting, and equipping caregivers. It is my personal pleasure and absolute delight to welcome you today.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
What would be your opening comments, Ebony?
My opening comments would be that I am so appreciative of the wellness model that you just shared with the caregivers, highlighting the importance of really looking at their overall well-being and to normalize caring for ourselves while we're caring for individuals that we love.
So in addition to the introduction that we gave, what would you like to tell us about who Ebony is?
Well, if I were just speaking about myself, I would really say that I am a lover of people. I am an encourager, I'm an educator, I'm a caregiver. And so those would be the things I would use to describe myself.
The description, lover of people, is quite delightful, I have to say, especially for an introvert like me, who can sometimes feel very, very reclusive. So that's really nice. Tell us about your writing journey, the 3 books that you have written. And today, as you look back, what has your experience as a writer been?
When I first started writing, I really felt that it was out of necessity because it was in the early 2000s. That's why the first book was Caregiving in the New Millennium. And we didn't have the internet access that we have now. So things like definitions for the types of care, where to go for various pieces of information, just the general things that you need to, in my opinion, start on a grounded foot as a caregiver, were not available at that time. So that was what prompted me to write that very first book. If I were to expand on that, as I started to not only work with caregivers, but then to also have my own personal experiences, I started working on At the Heart of the Matter, which is the book that I'm focusing on today, that I think is necessary for us as we're in the real meat, the real journey part of caregiving. And so I think sometimes there's a need to not only have bits of information that are going to be encouraging for you, but to have an opportunity to reflect.
Yes. So tell us about the book, The Heart of the Matter, and what led to this book first.
So my grandmother was a registered nurse. She went to the Harlem School of Nursing in the United States, and then moved my mother and her sisters to a very rural community in Iowa, and was a nurse there. And so as I grew up, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and she was I would say she was more religious, but she also had a very special spirit. Her spirit spoke to my spirit. And what I mean by that is that I also had a caregiver's heart, which was why I became a registered nurse. So she was kind of my inspiration for that. And in 2004, she passed away. And my way of working through my grief, but love, was to also document the caregiver journey for caregivers that I felt might be continuing to care in the face of grief.
So we've had a few exchanges around the whole challenge of grief and working through with grief. And in order to understand this book and your love for your grandmother, and the fact that you channeled it by writing, tell us a little more about what was the writing journey about. It's not easy for anyone to sit back and write about, their experiences, or write about something that they'd like to offer as a perspective to the world. So subject like caregiving.
Yes. So behind this, I just started to think about the whole experience of caregiving as a journey. And for me, it was a spiritual journey. And I think that means something different based on your position and station in life, and the closeness of the relationship you had with the individual. Right before my grandmother passed away, I'll tell you, the first poem in the book is about my heart crying. And it was because my mother and I were meeting, and family members were meeting in Las Vegas. My daughter would go visit her during the summers. And my grandmother had relocated from Iowa to California when she retired. And so she wanted to come back to the Midwest. And she was in her mid to late 70s, and had a serious stroke the year before. And so I just was like, I have all these things going on. I have my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were staying, they had relocated from somewhere, so they were staying in our home. We had our own 2-year-old at the time. I was so stressed. And so I had this whole conversation with my mom about how I just couldn't do it. I can't take on the responsibility of bringing grandma back to the Midwest because I'm just overwhelmed. And she listened, and then she said, okay, I will see you on whatever day it was. And I ended up bringing grandma. She brought her, and I ended up bringing grandma back here to the Midwest. And I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to be open to teachable moments, because my grandmother ended up spending a week with me, and my husband. She spent some time with his grandmother, so they made a connection. And then a friend came and got her, church friend, and she was able to go where she wanted to go. And then at the end of that trip, she actually passed away. And so when I had an opportunity to reflect, it was like, if I hadn't been open to that teachable moment, I said no. I said I'm not going to do it. And I wouldn't have had an opportunity to really get to know her as an adult, because all of our past relationships had been grandmother, granddaughter, and my admiration of her being a nurse. So I think that it's not just me who has those types of things to share, that most of us have some major story that would help another person if they just had an opportunity to hear it. And so that's the context of At the Heart of the Matter.
There were so many pictures that were going through my head as you were describing what you were, and how teachable moments have actually been probably milestones for me. So that's an interesting point. And I feel that not just your writing, but your work at its core in so many ways is probably a tribute to your legacy of caregiving. I would like for you to talk to us about Caregiver Support Services and how was that in tandem with your writing? So, what is it that you chose to write about, and what was your experience of offering the services through your organization?
So Caregiver Support Services, my husband and I co-founded it in the late 1990s. And the whole idea was to provide training and support for caregivers. And so we did retreats. That was really one of the main things that we started with. It was a fundamental part of our services. And we kind of fell into, with my being a nurse, finding out that caregivers did not have access to training. And in order for them to be approved for certain programs that are available, for maybe being reimbursed through an insurance company or a state program, if they were to take a training like a nursing assistant training, they would receive a additional hourly stipend. So we did in-person caregiver training for 12 years. We trained maybe 300 or so caregivers in person every year. And part of that training was to not only talk about the basics that you would need to provide care, but also self-care. And one of the really flagship things was grief, because what I would find is that, and what I would say is that when you really sit down and talk to people and you have that opportunity, you will find that people are grieving. But it's such a difficult topic sometimes to broach that we don't talk about it. And in that feeling of grief, there are also happy moments. And so sometimes if we are not having had the ability to process the sadness, then we can just shut down and separate. So the 3 books are really designed for, I'm a new caregiver, caregiving in the new millennium. I need information and access to resources.
Mm.
I'm in the caregiving, the thrusts of caregiving. I need training. So we have the online training. Um, I'm on the journey and I really need to do some self-care. And that's where At the Heart of the Matter comes in. And then Reflections from the Soul is from the grief discussions that we had with every class that we had come through. And I tell you, it was such a powerful experience to get, 15 or 20 people who've been together for a couple of weeks learning to actually talk about what prompts them into becoming a caregiver or what had prompted them. And then to also talk about and release sadness that they may have been experiencing through their life. Powerful, very powerful.
I would reckon. I'm just trying to draw a parallel or see how there might be differences in the socio-cultural norms. And if I were to offer that professional caregiving in India, for example, is only nurses or nursing per se, and most other is not trained or organized. There are caregivers in every home, whether they are members or they are even helpers, but they are not necessarily trained in the act of caregiving. And we certainly don't have a health program in which we would have, for example, health insurance providing a better opportunity for earning for caregivers. I find it quite fascinating that caregiving is a career. Caregiving is a profession. And we have some way to go. In our world, mostly, caregivers are family members, mostly. Mm-hmm. And simply because you are a woman in the house, you are the caregiver.
I would say that has been really true here, and that it's only been in more recent years with more advocacy that it's become a more prevalent thing, that we know that family caregivers are the backbone of the healthcare system. And I would say that we're the backbone for the world health system. It's only really recently been published in some of like CDC and I'm thinking of like the UN, places like that, where we're talking about about caregiving as a public health issue, because we do need those of us who are doing this maybe more than one time. Most of us really are, to have some efficiencies in the way that we do some things, and to have understanding so that we're not overwhelmed and burned out by the care that we're providing and the lack of training and support that individuals really do need to be successful. And so I've had an opportunity to really look at from having done things in person to identify what is really needed now that we're so that we can open things up to a more global opportunity for individuals to learn, what's normal aging for my parent or my grandparent, so that I'm not thinking everything is Alzheimer's or dementia, because it could be as simple as a bladder infection. So we want to, even if it's not necessarily going to be recognized as a something for reimbursement, it can help you the training can help you to decrease your distress and have a better understanding, and maybe open doors for you.
That leads me to the other question, and in your experience, and I think you reference that in your books as well, which is the potential of burnout among caregivers, and what might caregivers need to do in order to, prevention is better than cure, without doubt, especially for burnout. So what are the telltale signs of a burnout? Let's start with that.
Well, an individual who's burning out may not even know why they're crying, overeating, sleeping too much. You mentioned earlier being an introvert. I am an introvert, but I love people. So I do, sometimes when I get overwhelmed, I can notice that I start to self-isolate and do so. The family, I get everything ready, the family comes, and then I go to my room or to a quiet place. And so those can be signs that you are maybe experiencing some level of distress that could lead you to feeling burned out.
The need for replenishment, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we all have our own internal barometers that tell us that I need to slow down or I need to replenish myself. So what can a caregiver do to prevent reaching that stage?
Well, I think that you have some excellent resources to and to really look at, number one, as you mentioned, being empowered. One of the things we also use a wellness model, and it's very similar. And there's two things that we add to that, and that is empowerment and resilience, because we do have to be empowered to reach out to get the help if we need it. And then we do have to be resilient to try different approaches when we find that things that we've been doing are no longer working. So number one, recognizing and acknowledging. I would say, if it's possible, if you have others who are within the circle, just like you shared the very first picture, I love that so much, to look at that picture of the family and to identify things that, in a culturally appropriate way that would be appropriate for other family members who are caregivers, for them to handle those things. So maybe, for example, my husband's really good at finances, and I am too, but when we've been in caregiving situations, he's been very good at that, and organizing, talking to the social workers and such for the services. And for me, from a nursing perspective, I've always been able to step in and look at medications and personal care. And so if you have family members and you can kind of complement each other on the things that you're doing to take care of your loved one, then you also kind of pull those things apart so that everybody is contributing, and then it's not on the one lady who's hugging her husband or the daughter that's standing behind her parents in the picture that you shared.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that can do is perhaps build your infrastructure, right? Allocate jobs and say, this is my go-to person for this, and that is my go-to person for that. It's an act of mindfulness as well. I think, yes. Just this morning, I was trying to write down a few things that are on my mind, and I noticed there is a difference between having it in my mind versus putting it on paper. So the moment I kind of put it down and January, I must have this done. it was a very different feeling. So, for example, if one were to look at all the people in one's family and say, this is for this and that is for that, I think it would make a world of difference.
I agree, and I'm moving around because I have a chapter in here, and I think this questionnaire is also on the Caregiver Support Services site. But in here, you can't see it at all. But in here, if you see, there are questions that have that are designed for. There's a questionnaire designed for the family, so that you can talk about who's best for the lawn care or who's best for the housekeeping based on their score, and have that discussion. So I know that we've been really kind of thinking about, like you said, how do we actually document what it is that, not only what we're doing that is our special area, our strength, but also having the ability to know that you can either have just a regular journal or what have you, that you can just document your thoughts in that journal, or you can have a guided book like the At the Heart of the Matter that has a little brief discussion about how do I maximize my inner strengths, or what is my mission as a caregiver, and how does that relate to the care that my loved one is expecting to receive, and how does that relate to the spiritual journey that I am on in this role of loving someone, but also making sure that their needs are met at the same time.
One of the things that I was just thinking, so for example, when we are in the thick of caregiving, let's say you described having to look after your daughter and then having to look after grandma. In that moment, it can feel very overwhelming to sit back and think and plan. And I really like the format of your book in that there are questionnaires and there are questions, and it's a little bit of a workbookish format that can help you work that through. However, as per our research, we have found very few people have the mental bandwidth or the time. And the first response is, I don't have the time for this. So what can we do with, in your experience, with caregivers to gently walk them through this thinking through and planning process, especially when they are in the thick of caregiving?
I think it's difficult. I think you're very it's very good that you brought up that point, and I will share that this past summer, my dad was in a really bad car accident, and was in the hospital for 76 days before he passed away. And at the beginning, my stepmother is a doctor, a physician, and so she just always goes into the clinical mode of things. And I can do that too, because our first reaction is to just get through the situation. And I remember calling her maybe a couple of weeks into him being in the hospital, and her saying, at first, like offering for me to come home, and then his hospital was a distance. And I had to call her a few times and just say, okay, I'm putting on my Caregiver Support Services hat, and I'm asking you, how are you doing? Mm-hmm. And what are you doing for yourself? Because she was driving from about a 40-minute drive to and from the hospital every day for a while, and didn't want anybody else to rush and come out, because if he made a recovery, which we were expecting, then this would be a long-term recovery, and we would need the family members to be there over time when her time time to be away from work ran out. And we had to have a serious conversation about the part of self-care. And I don't think that in those immediate, probably 30, 45 days, that there's any way you can do anything in emergency type situations or in caregiving situations that you can really do besides just do your best and get through it. And I feel like more reflection and introspection time for that comes when you've really got a set routine and your situation is more stable. And then now I can actually think a moment about self-care.
Yeah. It's really an interesting problem to solve. We don't invest in building our caregiving skills or our infrastructure when things are going well, right? Who wants to anticipate an emergency crisis, medical crisis? Nobody wants to. You want to cross the bridge when you come to it. But when you come to the bridge, it's a little late to plan these things. So we really need to find some way to solve this. And self-care, a lot is being said about that these days. And I think that all of it is great because we are challenging the idea that self-care is selfishness, it's not good, and things like that. What have you experienced is the resistance to self-care? So when you talk to caregivers, have you
exactly what you're saying, that people feel that they're being selfish, they feel guilty, and a lot of times too, you feel isolated as a result, because if your friends are not having similar caregiving experiences, and they may or may not be able, the people that you're close to may or may not be able to relate, and that feels very alone. So I think that there are getting over the fact, especially I think among women, that we deserve to take time for ourselves. And it may be something so simple, but to be able to do, like taking a nap or a hot bath or having things mapped out. I do think too that mapped out for self-care. I do think too, where we're probably going to have the most servable moment for our caregivers is probably their second experience with it. So, right now we're educating and building awareness, and I see you doing a beautiful job of that, and building programs and supports and getting the word out. And so some folks will take advantage of that now in their current caregiving situation. Some folks will be proactive because they're type A and they want to know, but the majority of us will have more than one caregiving experience, and we'll say, hey, I learned from that other time that I need to do this, this, and this, and I better do it or I'm going to burn out. So I think we're building the norm for accessing and using services by meeting people where they are, and then that second time around they'll be back.
That is a brilliant insight. That is so incredibly true. Even when we have conversations with gentle warriors, when we say that, tell us about your caregiving journey, there are two things that happen. One, people who are actively in caregiving are not so happy speaking about, they're still going through it. So long as it's a reflective conversation, people are okay, so I can talk about a journey probably because of the trauma and the healing that I need. So I can, I can look back. It can be a look back. The second thing that we encounter is that most people want to talk about their journey if, quote unquote, if it will help someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that very interesting because I think the first person it helps is yourself when you talk about it. That reflection can help you heal. But not many of us are interested in our own healing. We are more interested in helping others.
Well, and I think that's the nature of who we are as caregivers, that we spend our time focusing on others. And so you do think I'm going to help other people. And you don't always think about helping yourself so that you can help other people, and how unselfish it is for you to do the things you need to do for yourself so that you can have the capacity to do the things that you need to do for your family, and how important it is. We have been through, my husband and I, a few caregiving situations, primarily with his stepfather and his mother. And I'm so thankful that we, it was two different caregiving experiences, but I'm so thankful that we had the tools and knew that, okay, he's going to take time off so that he can, especially for my father-in-law, so that he could really focus on his care needs. And then with my mother-in-law, to make sure we did those things as far as separating out what each person could do so that we were all caring for mom and it wasn't on one person in the family. And then having that reflection of feeling like we did a good job together. And no matter what happens the rest of your life, you know that you did a good job with caring for your parents. And to me, there's no greater honor than having that experience. And then, well, I'll just leave it there. There's no greater honor than having that experience.
That's pretty much the essence of your books in so many ways, which is that how is it that caregivers can find pride in who they are? And how is it that caregivers can perhaps look at their experience and make it meaningful? I would like for you to, before we go on to the questions that came to us, I would like for you to talk to us about what it means as a caregiver to talk about your journey and to write about it. What would you say?
I think it's so important, even if you don't think that you're going to share. It's like we were just talking about being in a support group. Even if you don't think that your reflections, your thoughts, your perspectives are something that you're going to share with other people, I just find the writing process so cathartic, and being able to express myself. And I find that most of the time when I'm having those ruminations of things going over and over in my mind, it's when I go to lay down and go to sleep. And so if you take a few minutes, if you're a person who maybe you're a morning person, and so it's your thing that you get up and do for yourself 5 minutes in the morning, or if you're a person that's probably going to ruminate and you won't fall asleep until you get your thoughts out, take that 5 or 10 minutes and write that 1 or 2 sentences to yourself. And you don't have to make it pretty. It doesn't have to be spelled right. It doesn't have to be in the right order. Just document what you are feeling and what you're experiencing right now. Maybe it's something really good that happened. Maybe it's something that frustrated you, but you got a teachable moment out of it. Believe me, I really cried hard tears when my mom said, well, grandma's bags are packed. I'll see you in Las Vegas. And I didn't really process that teachable moment until much later, but I started writing about that as I was going through it. And so I'm just encouraging you to, maybe you're not ready to openly share in a group, but you are ready to write a sentence or two, something meaningful that you can reflect on, that can encourage you as you move forward, caring for someone you love.
That is, I think, the key takeaway, if there was one, though of course there have been so many, which is that can we just document what we are going through to do a look back. Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation that has been insightful and sensitive and very, very helpful. I'm going to take a few questions that came in at the time of one second, registrations. The first one is, our daughter is displaying mood swings since last 7 months, but refuses to see a therapist or a psychiatrist. What do we do as caregivers?
That's really challenging. I think sometimes what we have to do, or I won't say have to do, what can be a useful approach is that folks won't necessarily go ahead and get help for themselves. But if you're able to talk about how this would help the family, how this would help the parents, so saying, you really getting an opportunity to express how you're feeling with a therapist will give us an opportunity to not only be supportive of you, but it's a way that you're reciprocating that support. So I can care for you longer. I can help to try to know what's going on with you if you have someone that you can talk to in confidence, and then I'm willing to come in and listen to what your feedback is for me too.
Absolutely. I think suggesting to someone that you should go and get professional help doesn't go down very well. We can do what we can do for ourselves. So thank you. I think that's a nice way to frame it. The second question is, how can a well-wisher help a caregiver's mental health? Since they have problems too, but might not be able to share it with anyone. So a well-wisher caregiver.
I think just being there and being consistent. So if that person is someone that I know everyone was calling my mother to ask about my dad, and we had a website and everything where they did she did daily updates. But a simple text, I'm thinking about you. And let her be open. If she wants to pick up the phone and call, then I know that she has the time that day. So I'm not imposing, but those are the kind of things that I suggest, is just being consistent. And it doesn't have to be something big. Just, I'm thinking of you. I'm here.
Yeah. I also think that well-wishers can perhaps do very, very specific tasks, daily support tasks, and that can be helpful because they can take away the chores if you're close by and if you can manage, then I think that's useful too. The final question, and the difficult one, is how to develop psychological flexibility that will ultimately build resilience.
Ooh, yeah, that's a that's a question.
Yes, it's a question.
I think we're all a work in progress, and I think that there are many things that are going to impact your psychological well-being. And depending on where you are in life stages and caregiving stages, the things that are going to be helpful for you are going to change. So I don't have a real specific answer for that other than to be flexible with yourself and to continue looking at ways that if this practice was working, but it's no longer working, then I need to maybe reach out for some type of additional resource or assistance.
I have something to offer you.
Oh, good.
Because you said it in the first few minutes of your conversation. I think being teachable is the best way to build your psychological flexibility. On many occasions, we are not teachable, we are not coachable. So I think being open to say that, okay, what can I learn from this? Can possibly. That was the second big takeaway from what you said for me today. I do think that that's something that's going to stay with me, and I totally cherish it. I'm going to open the floor for any other questions. Anyone would like to raise their hand and ask a question, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, or show up on video. Anyone? Are there any questions? I have one question, Ebony, which is, I have fantasized about writing a book forever. I have wanted to be an author, but I don't think I have the discipline to write enough, or I also judge what I write. So what can I do if I wanted to write a book?
I think that you, from what I see and what I know of you and the work that you're doing, that you are already authoring your book. And I bet if you went to various notes and things that you have, that you could pull together 5 or 10 things that would be excellent takeaways. And I think that we need your insight and your perspective from not only a cultural standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint. And so I encourage you to sit down and just spend 5 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes in the evening and just jot down a thought or two. And it might not all come together at once. It took a long time to write about grief because I had to go through some things in order to have what it really meant for that content, to develop that content. And so maybe the reason that you're feeling like a little apprehensive is because, you have things that you haven't had an opportunity to reflect on, or you have. But I bet that what you would write would be very helpful and very meaningful to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think I really need to figure the discipline. I noticed Sudeshna has her video on. Do you have a question?
Thank you. No question. I just wanted to thank her for saying a very interesting thing that, caregiving with no regrets. It is something I could really connect with Dr. Green, and thank you for saying that. You as a caregiver, do the best you can at that point of time. And being able to move past that with no regrets is, it helps you in many ways. I don't know how to express it. Maybe just makes you much lighter down the road. Caregiving can be a huge burden sometimes, especially when you're going through it. But doing the best you can and moving forward with no regrets also is important. Thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We also have another question. Madhura, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Yes, so I wanted to ask that if someone is depressed or they are going through a lot, how can they be an effective caregiver to someone else?
From my personal perspective, I don't think that you can. I think that at some point you will hit a brick wall. And so if you're noticing that you're having these changes, and I'm saying this from a very personal experience. When my mother-in-law, when we cared for her and she passed away, what I do is I pack my schedule. I do more, I write more, I take on more projects, and then I don't focus on my own well-being. And it's taken time for me to notice that pattern in myself. And I actually I call it the ram has touched the wall. I had a moment where it was like, I got to go and talk to someone because my grief was so intense when I actually started to get in tune with my feelings. So I don't think you can care for someone effectively if you are not having an opportunity to meet your own psychological needs, and that we have to make it more acceptable to go and talk to a counselor, or if it's a caregiver, Saathi, or someone who understands where you're coming from, so that you can at least start to dig your way out of how you're feeling. But you can't care for someone else if you're not well yourself. And
I think
it's hard for those of us who think we can do it all.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for saying that, because on many occasions, especially women are made to feel they can do it all. And they must do it all, or this is their duty to do it all. Whereas, great question, Madhura, for asking that. I'm going to have a last round. Any other questions? And if there aren't any, I would like to thank you for joining us this morning or Saturday evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And Ebony, what would you like to tell us as a way to close the session?
I would like to say that to be encouraged. The things that you're doing as a caregiver are so important to those that you love, and that self-care is at the top and equal to the very important things you're doing for those that you love. And so we must care for ourselves if we're going to be effective at caring for our loved ones. And then I will say, it's okay to cry and be frustrated, but to stay open to those teachable moments.
Well, I have to say that I am touched and honored that it is so late in your part of the world. But thanks to the circumstances these days, we are able to exchange ideas, be present together. I really appreciate your, what is it, 11:30 at night?
Yeah.
And we are here in the morning of a Sunday, listening to you, getting inspired, and so grateful for all the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure and honor to speak with you this evening.
Yes. I am waiting for the world to open up and for us to travel to a location and meet in person, and
Yeah.
that can come true as well.
Yes, absolutely.
In the meanwhile, with lots of love and hope and care for everyone, and the wish that by challenging what is been written in print and pictures on caregivers and caregiving, by writing your stories and by sharing with everyone, we will be able to change the way the world perceives caregivers and caregiving, and we can create a world that cares. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Evening.
Good night.
Good night.